you, Savita, so much for being here. Savita Pawnday is Deputy Executive Director at the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect, which is an organization that's based in New York and Geneva, which I myself have enormous respect for. They do an extraordinary advocacy and research work in places around the world. Savita has been with them for
10 years.
10 years now, and has in that time, worked in a number of different countries, and has, I think, become one of the people that I know who it has really got both a theoretical and a practical grasp of the reality of the R2P concept and its deployment. So we're just thrilled that she's here to talk to us. So without further ado, please join me in thanking her so much for coming and sharing with us this week.
Thank you so much for having me here. And why don't you guys come and sit on the table? There's not enough people here. So let's fill up the table and be casual and have a chat. So I was asked to give a long talk. So I don't think that I'm going to talk for a very long time, though, as Max and Steve can attest to the fact that I can just talk and talk and talk on R2P, and I can talk till kingdom comes. So, but I'll keep my remarks sort of fairly short, not more than 20-25 minutes, because I was asked to speak for 40 minutes. And then let's have a conversation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have, either on R2P, international relations, or how I got here. Any and all questions are welcome. So, I mean, just so that everybody is on the same page on what R2P is. So R2P is a norm, principle, concept, depending upon how wedded you are to this idea. Norm is a standard of behavior, and that's how we at the Global Center view it, that it should be a standard of behavior for the international community. R2P was created as a political and an operational response to the horrific tragedies in Rwanda and Bosnia and Kosovo and elsewhere. And because, I mean, when I say political and operational, by that I mean that there are enough legal obligations for states to act in the face of atrocity crimes. So from the Genocide Convention to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to the additional protocols and conventions, different international treaties. So there is enough, and through IHL, through international humanitarian law, there is enough legal underpinnings for action. But R2P is an operational and a political response. So how do you operationalize the idea of never again? And R2P stipulates that states have a primary responsibility to protect their populations from the crimes of genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. If a state, and then the international community has a responsibility to provide assistance to states in upholding this responsibility. And if a state is manifestly failing, that is, it's unwilling or unable to protect its population. So unwilling is states that are the perpetrators, so South Sudan, Myanmar in many cases, or states that are unable. So let's say, to some extent, Democratic Republic of the Congo or Central African Republic, which just do not have the capacity. So in the case of manifest failure by the state, it's the responsibility of the international community to protect populations from these four crimes. And I say populations and not citizens, because it's not about citizenship, it's about the populations which belong within your own territory, or however you call country or national borders, or however you want to view that. And then in terms very, very quickly, the four crimes are genocide. Genocide is a crime which is about in whole or part destroying a community or a kind of people, so based on religion, race. It doesn't have political groupings, but ethnic, religious, racial. War crimes are crimes which are committed in wartime, but so R2P is created to protect populations from war crimes that are committed on a systematic and a widespread basis. So essentially a lot of violation of IHL, international humanitarian law, attacking disproportionately non-combatants within the field. And crimes against humanity is a huge set of different kind of crimes. The reason they are included in within R2P and within the R2P sphere is that they have to be systematic and widespread. Systematic, that they should be part of a policy or a plan, and widespread, that the number is huge enough. So, but it's not and, it's or. So widespread or systematic. Ethnic cleansing is not legally defined crime. It actually is a subset of crimes against humanity. But ethnic cleansing, we have seen it in Kar, in Myanmar recently. 700,000 people were ethnically cleansed from Myanmar and are now refugees or displaced in Bangladesh. So ethnic cleansing, although not legally defined, other than the three crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, which are defined through the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, through various conventions, additional protocol, international treaties. So those are the four crimes, and that's what R2P was created to protect populations from. I will go into a bigger sort of discussion on the implementation a little bit, but I just wanted to sort of tell you, why is R2P special? Yeah. So not because I have drank the Kool-Aid, but I truly think it's an important idea. So 14 years since the adoption of the responsibility to protect, and it was a unanimous adoption at the UN World Summit, which was the 50th anniversary of the UN, into the World Summit Outcome Document. And this document is kind of important because it is what led to adoption of R2P. R2P is paragraphs 138 and 139 of the World Summit Outcome Document, but it also created the Human Rights Council in Geneva. So it led to a lot of innovation within the UN system. So it's an important document. If you don't have that much, if you have some free time, you are a UN nerd, it's good to look at the document. Yeah, it's a special document, and a very normative document. So R2P is paragraphs 138, 139 of the World Summit Outcome Document. And even though we've had the Genocide Convention, R2P has been instrumental in energizing these discussions on prevention and response to atrocity crimes. I mean, with R2P, we've had a large amount of innovative thinking done around identifying risk factors, developing early warning, models, to create articulation of inhibitors, actually what stops atrocities from happening, and other institutional mechanisms which have been new in terms of how to respond and prevent atrocity crimes. So when I say institutional mechanism, that means that what have we developed over the last few years which have institutionally addressed atrocity crimes. And this has been sort of under the leadership of, the last Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to the current Secretary General. We've had 9 reports of the Secretary General. And I know this is very inside baseball and who cares about reports, but these are important because they translate these reports, which have been the 9 reports of the Secretary General on R2P, translate this idea of a big political commitment into concrete action. So how do you translate a political commitment like R2P to real translation? So the reports have been, okay, what can a state do? How do regional organizations help? What is the role of international community in providing assistance? So all of these different 9 reports have been able to unpack some of these various able to unpack this long, big political idea into concrete action. Yeah, so institutional mechanism in terms of the 9 reports of the Secretary General. Based on these 9 reports, for the last 9 years, in the General Assembly, we've had an informal interactive dialogue between member states. So in the General Assembly, all 192 states have come together and have discussed this report. And it is important because by discussing this report, they can again think about what are some of the ways in which they can do a better job, what are some of the best practices out there, how can they think about using these best practices and then implementing them within their own national systems, and how can they do better in providing assistance. So the 9 reports, the 9 interactive dialogues, now the interactive informal dialogues have become actually formalized, and this is very technical inside UN, so informal versus formal, but it's progress, it's moving towards the right direction. And then, I mean, over the years, we have also developed a huge amount of consensus, and this consensus has translated, I mean, political consensus around R2P has translated in over 70 UN Security Council resolutions which contain the language of R2P. There are over 30 Human Rights Council resolutions which, again, include the language on R2P. So you have all of these different institutional progress which has been made in translating this political commitment into concrete action. And besides that, I mean, in terms of developing a political consensus based on all of these different advances, what has become very obvious, and I have been working, I mean, as Max said, on this issue for the last 10 years. And, in 2008, when you would have conversations with member states, they would say, sovereignty would come up, that we cannot interfere in the affairs of the state, or arguing about sort of what is genocide, and is crimes against humanity really is R2P really the right term, and over the years those kinds of discussions have melted away, and this is when I say that we have made some progress towards political consensus. So in a lot of literature and a lot we will still hear R2P is controversial. Even with member states, when I talk, they'll talk about R2P is controversial, but during the informal interactive dialogues or during our conversations, nobody will say that, oh, we do not have a responsibility to protect when there is genocide or atrocity crimes happening. The discussions now, even from a Venezuela or a Cuba, is not about whether R2P is valid or whether we have a responsibility to protect populations from these 4 crimes. The discussions or the arguments are about the how. How do you do it? And every country comes to the how based on how they view the political and the international system in how they operate under it. So that's when I say that there is a political consensus. Even countries like Myanmar and South Sudan and Sudan, which are perpetrators themselves, will not come and say R2P is invalid. In their statements, they will say, the crimes are not occurring, so you don't have a right to talk about Myanmar in the context of R2P. But they will not challenge the validity of the norm or the concept itself, or the validity that we need to protect populations from these 4 crimes, and which, for some of you who have been around the international system for a very long time, is a new thing, is something different than the last 15 years. Because before that, it was about sovereignty, it was about the fact, and I'm not saying it has all melted away and we live in, it's all Hakuna Matata and we live in this perfect world. This is not to say that, but there is some rhetorical commitment to this idea. There is more and more sort of political consensus around the fact that sovereignty is responsibility. You do not have a license to kill. So even though Myanmar is very brazenly doing this to the Rohingya, they will still hide it, during the Security Council visits. So, and they will come under the pressure of a to actually facilitate a Security Council visit to say that, look, we have not done anything wrong, which was not the case in Syria in 1982, where you could kill 2,000 people and nobody will ask questions, or nobody will even know what has happened. So in that sense, we feel that we have won the battle of ideas, and now it is about implementation, essentially. And I am talking about all of these different sort of institutional progress and progress in rhetorical terms and progress in terms of, political consensus. But all of this conceptual progress has actually not translated to anything. We have many immense failures to deal with. Yes, and these immense failures to deal with is a reality that we have been battling with in the last decade. And these are that more than 68.5 million people are displaced right now, and they're not displaced because of tsunami and earthquakes. They're displaced because of conflict, of atrocities, of being targeted. So 68.5 million people are displaced. 150 million people require humanitarian assistance around the world, and this is a huge strain on the international system. We've also witnessed unprecedented attacks on norms and laws that safeguard humanity. So, and including international humanitarian law. So, indiscriminate killing of civilians, targeting of schools, hospitals has become routine. And it's not only the non-state actors, it's also actually state actors which are equally complicit in it. And the growing challenge is, and peacekeeping. Peacekeeping, which in many cases are the only people who are standing between life and death for many populations around the world, are facing challenges and complex challenges. I mean, they have been unable to protect civilians within their protection sites. So in South Sudan to CAR, you see that these challenges are not being met. And I mean, and in many cases where we feel that R2P has been operationalized, it has been only operationalized. It has not been institutionalized. And the difference is that operationalized to address imminent risk, so to address electoral violence in Kenya. But it has not been institutionalized in the sense that there is no longevity to any of the actions that have taken place. So we are talking about operationalization, but we are not really going into institutionalization. So what I'm trying to say is that, like, from all of this rhetorical, I mean, progress and institutional progress, it has not actually translated, and the levels of failures are so immense that a lot of people come to me and say, what, let's concentrate on the success stories. And I'm like, what success stories? I mean, it's disingenuous to talk about success stories. And you know, when I get into the weeds on it, I can tell you like smaller actions that we have taken that are useful on, I mean, states, you know, the failure in Syria, I mean, it's colossal. I mean, over, you know, over a million, I mean, over 500,000 are dead. Over 11 to 12 million just displaced from Syria. Myanmar, over, I mean, it was not 40,000, 50,000, 100,000. It is 700,000 people. You're kicking out 700,000 people from your country with no consequences. So the failures are colossal. And the only thing that we have been able to do is to create, I mean, investigative mechanisms. So in Syria, I mean, the deadlock in the Security Council is amazing and immense. And some of the response from the member states has been that, you know, so, okay, we have so much evidence of crimes being committed coming out of Syria, and nothing is happening on the UN Security Council. So Liechtenstein, this really small country in Europe, you know, creates a coalition of states which comes together, and we create something called, and we were very instrumental and helped them in thinking about this, the International Independent Investigative Mechanism for Syria. And this mechanism, which was created and is being funded now by multiple member states, is located in Geneva, and the job of this mechanism is basically to collect evidence and verify it so that this evidence can be stored and protected for future accountability measures. But that is no, you know, no consolation to a woman who has lost 4 sons to the war in Syria or has lost everything. So these are very tepid and small measures, but you know, these measures help. And if we look at international politics, there are never, you know, grand successes. Smaller successes actually make up grand successes. So that's what we are working on, and that's what my organization does in terms of, you know, we look at country situations where atrocities are happening. We look at different kinds of risks. We do a lot of advocacy with member states. We say, okay, this is the measure that you need to use. This is what needs to be done. And also in many cases, we help build institutions. And the way we help build institutions is that one of the couple of mechanisms which have come out with R2P are, one is a group of friends. So group of friends is a mechanism which exists in the UN. So there are group of friends on Haiti, there'll be a group of friends on women, peace and security, that basically mean a member state is championing this cause. So there's a group of friends for R2P. It's one of the biggest group of friends. It's 50 member states, literally 2/3 of the UN membership. And the job of the group of friends has been to develop that political consensus. They give joint statements during the interactive dialogue. So they speak with one voice about the importance of R2P. They give joint statements during UN Security Council open debates. And these are all sort of, you know, nonsensical bureaucratic things, but they all add up. So on peacekeeping, they will have a joint statement, and this will be it's the global center. We are the secretariat for the group of friends. Many a times we write these statements, and the process of getting these statements together, because you have 50 different voices which have to come together in a statement, and these are very contested statements, but they are very helpful statements in the sense that it helps states to think about how to actually implement it. So when we gave a statement, which was for the first time last year on peacekeeping, the group of friends will come together, 50 countries will talk about. So we will do the first draft, which will be very good, which will have every very strong language. Then it will go to all the member states. And then they will come back, they'll say, well, my country doesn't agree with this, and we actually cannot use IHL. We actually cannot say the words R2P. So it's just very, very contested. But what this process leads to is for the state to actually go back to capital, consult on the language, and for them to unpack as to how they view the operationalization of R2P. Because there's one thing to support the norm in the big flowery language, but then there's something else to actually support it in terms of operationalization and implementation. Now we are gearing up to do our first statement on sexual and gender-based violence, and let's see how that goes. We actually have submitted a draft. Now we're going to start getting different countries coming back with what are their red lines, and it's Nadia Murad who just won the and the doctor from DRC, I'm completely forgetting his name right now, who are going to be speaking. So let's see what happens in this and how the group of friends. So again, I mean, these are ways in which we are unpacking what it actually means to implement it. Because when governments say these things in statements, many a times there is also money which is then carved out. So if they say that we believe in this, then they can give money to programs which lead to psychosocial support of Yazidi survivors of gender and sexual based violence. So all of these statements are just not words. They're also very important in terms of generating policy, generating funding for different kinds of initiatives. So that's the fight sometimes. And then the other institutional mechanism has been the R2P Focal Points Network, and I was just talking to Max about it. And this is again also very innovative. It's very much my baby, so I'm very proud of it. We started it in 2010, and when we started it, we actually did not know how to do this because there were not a single model out there which was actually successful. I mean, there were some models around climate change and disability, but they did not actually reflect the kind of mechanism that we were creating. Now, R2P Focal Points Network is a network of 60 governments, and the government has to say that we are appointing a senior level official within their government who's in charge of R2P policies. Now, this is a big job for just one person, but it's a start. Yeah, so it's again, small things make big things happen. Every drop creates the sea. I mean, we have a saying in Hindi. I don't know whether it applies to in English, but that's the thing. So with R2P Focal Points, I mean, it's 60 governments, and we meet annually. So there have been different governments who have hosted this annual meeting, and basically R2P Focal Points come from different ministries. In some cases they come from foreign ministries, justice ministries, human rights ministries. They come from Europe and Asia and Africa, and each of these governments have different priorities, different capacities, different histories, but we try to bring them together and together unpack what it actually means to implement R2P. And we have annual meetings, so they have taken place from Denmark to Botswana, South Korea, Qatar, Finland, everywhere basically. And then the next meeting is going to happen in Brussels, and the European Union, which is the only regional organization which has appointed a focal point, is going to host. And these meetings are very interesting because we also discuss like very big issues, but many a times it's actually a therapy session for focal points who come together and say that, I really tried on Myanmar. I really did try my government to impose the right kind of sanctions or get, Federica Mogherini to actually pick up the phone and tell Myanmar government that your preferential trade agreement with EU will be jeopardized if you treat your populations like that. But it didn't happen because, we are under a lot of pressure. And many a times these sessions actually lead for each of them to think about strategies of how to overcome many of these bureaucratic hurdles. So it's not about solving big problems, but about getting action on smaller things and getting across, different departments. So the South Korean focal point one day, I mean, he actually was very sincere. He took the framework of atrocity crimes. This is document which was created by the UN, which tells you about risk factors and indicators. And he actually in a very sincere way took it to their justice ministry and the police commissioner of Seoul and said, let's look at this and let's see whether it's applicable to us. And they laughed him away, So in many cases, it's like many focal points from the European countries who are talking about like how xenophobia and hate speech is so intense in their countries, and they can't do anything because they sit in the foreign ministries, and how it is so difficult to look internally and have that conversation. So it's not only about sort of looking at big ideas, but it's also about looking at how we can overcome some of the bureaucratic hurdles and some of the very real realpolitik, like trade agreements matter, China matters, and how we get over that. So, And it's 60 countries, some of them are really good, some of them are not that good. So, I mean, but basically it's a huge step forward. Have we been able to crack every puzzle? Not really. We are still trying, but it's all, progress. So in that context, I want to come back to the pillars. And so what can states do? So in terms of pillar 1, R2P basically tells you that create spaces for intercommunal dialogue, create peace councils, create or enable mechanisms that then lead to good governance, because in the end, good governance leads to a lot of good things. So good governance in the context of, guaranteeing minority rights, creating educational curriculums which don't demonize a certain kind of minorities, that discourage hate speech, create those kinds of national narratives, memorialize, acknowledge past atrocities, acknowledge the rights of the victim, acknowledge, take transitional justice mechanisms seriously, because if transitional justice mechanisms are a very good way of ensuring guarantees for non-recurrence. They provide guarantees for non-recurrence. In terms of pillar 2, like what can states do? Again, the things that we tell states to do is, provide capacity building, train police officers, train judges, train, in Liberia, there were, the Liberian focal point, when he was talking in the focal points meeting, he said we have 15 judges in the country, 15 trained judges for the entire country of Liberia. How do you help us? Help us, give us scholarships so people can be trained get a legal degree, train. And I mean, it's not even about training judges or lawyers, train legal aid personnel, so it's about that. Or in many cases, it's also about denying means of perpetration. So, respect the global arms trade treaty. Do not supply arms to potential perpetrators. Bilaterally think about what sanctions can be imposed if you think a particular country is committing atrocities. And then there is the pillar 3 aspect. And pillar 3 aspect is very much the sharper end of the discourse, in which you have many other measures. But it's not only about military measures. It's also about looking at different coercive and non-coercive. So non-coercive diplomacy, bringing parties together, providing good offices, coercive measures from targeted sanctions to asset freezes. What also works is cancelling visas for the children of the perpetrator. Your kid is studying in SUNY Binghamton, I'm cancelling their visa. So they're coming back. It puts pressure. So from these kinds of arms embargo have been very, very successful. So thinking about denial of aid, and also like with a lot of focal points when we talk about, it's about like translating commitment into policy. So with development aid, we also think in terms of, when you give development aid, also think about ways in that it doesn't I always confuse this word, and this is like my downfall with the English language. Exacerbate, yeah. So exacerbate ethnic tension. So you're not giving one community more than the other. You're thinking about this so that's the reason you use the atrocity prevention lens. So these are all the different ways in which states can do better. And then in conclusion, I just want to say that, it's a long battle. So the next 10 years, as I said, about, R2P will be about developing national capacities to prevent atrocities, and implementation at the national level will involve a wide variety of actors and both political will and technical expertise. For example, creating an accountable security sector is not only a technical enterprise, but a deeply political process. It will be slow and not always be easy to measure success. However, in order to strengthen the agenda for prevention, it will be important for all actors, including organizations like mine, student, academics, to identify and collect empirical evidence of success, to identify strategies that work and policies that can be replicated. We have to identify both formal and informal ways in which states can assist each other and provide timely advice and capacity. At international level, it will be about strengthening the early warning, not early warning, but early response mechanism of the United Nations. In the most vexing and deadly cases where the state is manifestly unwilling to protect its population and international military intervention under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter is deemed necessary, We need to ensure that protective mandates are not manipulated for opportunistic reasons for regime change. However, most future mass atrocity cases require coercive measures, including military force, will also, in all likelihood, continue to look more like South Sudan, Central African Republic, Libya, Central African Republic, and not like Libya or Rwanda. That is to say, they will continue to require a complex element of coercion and consent. Yeah, it's not only about military intervention, it's coercion as well as consent, with legal authorization from the UN Security Council and active dialogue on how a state can uphold its responsibility to protect and how the international community can both assist as well as compel them to do so. Fundamentally, we need a more representative and responsive Security Council, which is not going to happen in our lifetime, but let's hope. And just some final thoughts that mass atrocity crimes are always an affront to the universal human rights and pose an intrinsic threat to international peace and security. We call them crimes against humanity precisely because regardless of where the victims are, these crimes diminish us all. They are never justifiable and they're always illegal and immoral. Finally, over the next 10 years, we need to improve our ability to assist states in rebuilding after conflict. We have seen in Libya what has happened. I mean, it has divided the country and completely strangled its future. Responsibility to protect, like all international norms, has no independent volition or agency of its own. R2P will not succeed because of its intellectual purity, nor will it fail because of its academic design. R2P will only ever be as consistent and as effective as policymakers and practitioners make it. And final comments on just motivating us all. The former High Commissioner Zaid Rad al Hussein said that all fights worth fighting involve long-term struggles. The fight against apartheid, slavery, and colonialism have been fought over a long term, with battles both won and lost. So our collective efforts to advance R2P and strengthen international justice will also be decades long, no doubt about it. There will continue to be disappointments and incongruities, but the arc of history, I know, is absolutely on our side. So thank you very much.
I have a question. So thinking about what can kind of ordinary citizens do who aren't policymakers, who aren't political science students working on collecting data on whether or not some of these measures are working. When I teach my human rights class, the students often just feel a sense of helplessness because everybody wants to do something, but if you're not a policymaker, what can you do? So what would your suggestions be?
I mean, I always get this question, and maybe 10 years ago, I would be just grappling with it and say, well, volunteer, But now I think just be good citizens, elect people who actually support multilateralism, because I think that no country in the world, I mean, today, I had a couple of classes in which people asked, I mean, what about US? And US doesn't have a responsibility for nation building. And the answer is that no, but nobody's asking the US to. I mean, it is about the multilateral system coming together. So across the world right now, there is this wave of nationalism, xenophobia, looking only inward and not looking outwards. And the consensus on human rights is just disintegrating. The consensus on what the multilateral system can do, because we all know no country in the world can solve all the problems. I mean, even the US has limits to its influence. I mean, we have seen it in Burundi, for example. They tried everything and the government said, screw off, like, we don't care, So, I mean, there are limits to even the most powerful countries. So it's not about one country or it's actually about politically engaging with the kind of politics that leads to multilateralism. Because, I mean, it also has to come from a space of, I'm my brother's keeper. This is very, religious, but that's where it comes from. And for many of the students, I mean, that's something that they need to do. And also, I mean, I think that as students and people who believe in human rights or as activists, I mean, it's also about sort of combating the hate speech within your society, is to also be now, it's not only just talking at people, but also listening to their point of view, just more empathy. I mean, again, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to give this answer because it was just volunteer and, an intern somewhere. But now it's actually be a good citizen, be a citizen of the world,
I really, this is a comment more than a question. But the article focal points where you have the network of government officials, I found that inspiring.
Yeah.
Because prior to your talking about that, with much of the discussion of consensus and the growing of consensus, I had this antenna of suspicion that went up and said, well, but everybody's going to talk the talk, and there's a performance, and if it's going to give them leverage vis-a-vis other powers, then how do you know that it's anything more than just lip service? But when you were talking about the focal points, it sounded to me like the vast majority are really grappling, and you're in a space where that element of performance is removed.
Absolutely.
That's your experience of this.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say I found that really inspiring, and that was one thing that gave me a little bit more optimism about all of this. And then just one other thing, when you were talking about capacity building and things like training judges and training police, it's brilliant, but it's so difficult because in many cases, for instance, I think of Russia, which I study, and people put all sorts of money into this when they were doing the post-communist transition, and it didn't work at all. And some of it is that ultimately making this go means that the people at the top have to give up power. And they were willing to take all sorts of money for police funding and workshops, but they had to give up power. And so, again, where you're talking about voting or social movements, that probably is where it needs to go. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on it, or the way in which these officials in the focal points groups try to tap into social movements.
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, and again, and I find it also very inspiring to actually work on this network because it's not been easy. I mean, it's 5 steps forward, but 20 steps backwards. It's also like one person will come in and he'll be, or he or she'll be very, very good and understand this concept and will want to do more, and then they get transferred out after 3 years, and again it's a process of educating them, and maybe they're not that good. But it's where the rubber hits the road, and and it's amazing because sometimes, like, when I talk to them and they'll be like, no, but we need to do this, and I'm like, but what has your country done? And compelling them in a particular way. And people in a lot of these ministries, even if their governments are not that great, are really actually committed to multilateralism, in many cases, in most cases actually. So it's really inspiring, and I hope that this is a way in which we can slowly but surely change cultures and lead to more sort of innovative mechanisms and more timely responses, not just with early warning. And on your second question, absolutely. I think it's very easy for me to say responsive security sector and train judges, but security sector reform is one of the most political processes in the face of this earth. Think about reforming. I come from India, where a security sector, where the police is still very much based on the colonial way in which police identity was. It's not about service to the community or anything like that. It's about sort of you first hit somebody with a stick and then talk to them. You don't go up to the police and ask for help. That just doesn't happen. So it's just the way, the posture. And in India, to talk about security sector reform, it will be inherently a political process. It's not a technical. There is technical aspects to it, and I don't know a single case. I actually, I'm very good friends with this colleague of mine who works for the Democratic Control of Armed Forces. They're based out of Geneva, and they do a lot of training around security sector. And and I asked Mark, I said, Mark, give me one example of successful security sector reform. And he's like, there is none. It's all pieces. It's all pieces of, a few things here and a few things there. And then these are all generational processes. They're not going to be, if you think it's going to be accomplished in a generation, you're dreaming. So it is a long process. It's not about, you're going to do it tomorrow. And I mean, in training, a lot of people have these knee-jerk ways of doing trainings. And training is, I mean, I think that within my field too, it's the biggest scam, because what are you training them for? Like, be clear. And you're like, no, we are raising awareness, but that's not helpful. Like, you need to be training them for something. How is this applicable? Like, what is it that they're going to do which is going to help them in their day-to-day work? And how is it that it's actually going to transform anything? And most trainers cannot answer that. The level of trainings, I mean, most of them that I've seen on the international sphere, on security sector, women, gender, I mean, are really a disaster, to say the least. And I know this intimately because we did this last year, and it was shocking. But all said and done, and also, I mean, the thing is that many of the police officers or judges, they might be good at their job, but they're not necessarily trainers, They're not necessarily people who can translate what they do into telling somebody how they can do it within their own context. So that's also like a bit of a disconnect. And we always think that any police officer can train, and that's actually not the case. But I completely agree with you. We have to be better at training. We have to be better at actually articulating what is this training going to accomplish. And you're right. I mean, in post-socialist transitions, I mean, it was very clear. I mean, even it was from constitutional reform to like this sort of, Washington consensus being imposed on all of these countries. I mean, there was no context. Context matters. No size fits all. I mean, one size doesn't fit all at all. I mean, policies can be replicated, but that doesn't mean that they don't require context. So, and also like that's where we need academics. I mean, somehow or the other, we actually do not use academics who know the regions and countries well. With most of the colleagues and my team that I work with, I always say to them that when you're trying to get to know a country, read an academic book, but actually call around and see who in the vicinity knows that country well, knows Burundi very well, or knows, I mean, they must have done their PhD thesis on Central African Republic. And much of the information that you'll get from them might not be useful to you, but it will give you a context. It will set the stage for you. So that's why we need expertise, to understanding different countries in depth, because that's not what, analysts or researchers can do, because they don't. Understandably, you have been working on in Human Rights Watch for 20 years and following South Sudan. But even then, you only come from one perspective, which is a rights-based perspective. So actually, I mean, read some literature and it'll give you a sense of the story of that country. So absolutely.
I really like that. I do capacity building as a forensic anthropologist.
Yeah.
And I lived in Colombia for 5 years doing capacity building there, and then I've also worked in Mexico and Algeria. And as an anthropologist, I had to understand the culture of the country and understand how to modify my training so that people could take it on. Otherwise, I was wasting my time.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And also, I mean, like listening to people. I mean, last year we did this training on atrocity prevention within peacekeeping missions. So we're essentially training military officers to be able to observe while they are deployed, what is the risk of atrocity crimes. And in most cases where they're deployed, atrocities are already happening. Yeah? So you're deployed in Malakal in South Sudan. Situation is kind of shit, you know that it's happening. But how do you understand what are the escalation points? How do you do risk assessments? So we sort of start with giving them simulations of like one particular country, and then without the atrocity prevention lens, then we sort of go towards, okay, now we have added the atrocity prevention lens. And it's very much looking at it from a perspective of even gender. So when I say lens, so when you look at a particular situation without a gender perspective, you'll come out with a different conclusion. But when you add the gender perspective, then you'll get a different perspective. So it's the same way with atrocity prevention lens. It's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about creating a nuance. And it was interesting because we went to 8 peacekeeping centers around the world. And each training had invited people from the region, and these are the biggest troop contributing countries. So people who are going to be deployed, and many of them were also trainers. So it was like sort of a training of trainers, and sort of also a training for people who are just going to be deployed in South Sudan or elsewhere. And again, I mean, with every training, it was not about me standing up there or my colleagues standing up there and like, okay, this is how you do it. The way to do it was actually peer learning. They knew the context better than I did. They know how to do, combat or how to actually do peacekeeping. What does it actually mean to be on a checkpoint? They know that better than I do. So a lot of it was about listening to them, and every training was different because in every training the context was different, the culture they came from was different. I mean, and it was also like so different in how they identified whether something, a response was proportional or not. Like there was this case on, so we put this case and we say, okay, this is the information you have and tell us whether this is an atrocity situation and what crime is occurring. So it is this case in which there are two this is in Iraq, and there are two we didn't give the number of, there are snipers on a building, and they are attacking, the Iraqi, Iraqi US forces. And the way to get, and then the response of the forces is to actually bomb the entire building. And what they didn't realize was there were like 200 people inside the building. So once they bombed the building, and in Europe, most of them said the response is proportional, whereas in India, Pakistan, in Kenya, they said this is absolutely disproportional response. I mean, this is not how you fight insurgency, because these troops were coming from a context of fighting insurgencies. They know how, and it was just so amazing that, whatever you expected was not what you got. On the issues of like, how do you deal with an enemy combatant? So like, do we classify as an enemy combatant? Then he comes under Geneva, but if we classify him as a terrorist, then what do we do with them? And it was so amazing because then there was police and military in the room, and the way police would think about it would be like, and I remember this guy Marco from Italy, he was like, you arrest him. So and the Norwegian police officer is like, Norwegian military is like, no, but he is a terrorist, so he's not under any of the. And Marco was like, doesn't matter. You need to give him due process. I don't care. Arrest him. But it was just so interesting to like, and the thing is that there are no answers. I mean, I am not a good training or a good simulation or a good, it's not about the answer. It's about the process. So, but I mean, we learn, we live and learn.
So just for a bit of context, first off, I really appreciate everything you've been saying so far. But myself and some of us in this room are students in our colonization, genocide, and violence class.
Yeah.
So this whole semester, I've kind of been having this idea in my head that I've been like really, I guess, like throwing around. And it just like, I've been wondering kind of what it looks like for accountability for perpetrators, especially because it does oftentimes boil down to like individuals at the end of the day. I guess like I really appreciate when you mentioned like transitional justice. I was just kind of wondering, especially like with like the context of like transformative and then also like distributive justice. Do you think that like there are ways that we can be holding perpetrators, whether it be like leaders or individuals, accountable that aren't involving necessarily like distributive justice processes, or just in general like with that idea of like mass atrocity violence prevention? Like, would you have any ideas of like solutions?
I mean, there is not one answer to that, and I think Max can answer that better. We had this very good discussion yesterday, but I think that, I mean, accountability matters. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean, but what kind of model of accountability you go for? I mean, in many cases, transitional justice, I mean, different countries have dealt with it differently. So in Rwanda, there was an ad hoc tribunal which was established, which was about, criminal responsibility and holding sort of the people who had command and control responsibility. And then because in a country like Rwanda, where perpetrators were right next to people who have actually suffered, there had to be some kind of transitional justice. And an instrument which is, a hybrid ad hoc tribunal is not capable of delivering that kind of sort of a justice process within a society. And Rwanda then went with this gacaca process in which, you would do these, where the perpetrators who were arrested, I mean, and there were a lot of problems with it. I mean, don't even get me started. But again, it was something rather than nothing. And the perpetrators would come and then they will apologize. They will actually recount what they did. And then you would also have the the survivors and the victims who will then come and, I mean, scream at them and have this sort of, a very cathartic process. And in many sense, and then, they would be then sentenced. And this was not, I mean, by any Western legal standard, this was not exactly due process as you would see it, but it worked in the case of Rwanda. So, I mean, there are many different kinds of models of justice. I mean, in South Africa, they went with truth commissions. When East Timor came out, they did not want to go the route of, criminal proceedings. I mean, they again went through the truth commission. So whatever heals society, and I mean, as you said, I mean, it's not about sort of only criminal. I mean, they're important, I mean, I have not lost anybody, but I think that if I lost somebody, I would want that person to be punished, But I think that it's also about taking the longer view of what works for society. How can justice be actually a process of healing, a process of moving forward and reconciliation. But there are so many different models and so many good practices out there which we can work, tweak them more and understand more. And it's one of the most important, I mean, even in the context of colonization, I mean, we've not had any, I mean, there's not much conversation around that. There's not any conversation around that. Most countries which I mean, I'm always shocked by British people coming up to me saying that, oh, well, I mean, at least you have trains. And it's like, screw you, or you speak English, or, I mean, it's amazing, the amount of, the level of sort of insensitivity, the level of sort of, around colonization. I mean, there's no acceptance of responsibility. And I wish like we had some, I mean, at least even in, I mean, and like I'm also, now I'm just rambling, but in many political science books, like if you, and as a person who's done a lot of higher education in political science, unlike comparative politics or even comparative literature, like a lot of these different, where there's some acknowledgement of where we are coming from. Most international relations books on, let's say, Rwanda will start in 1945. I mean, there'll be a paragraph on what the colonization was all about, and then let's go on and start looking at, so there's no real understanding of history. And to me, many a times, a justice mechanism, I mean, and this is very personal, around colonization would be for people to just acknowledge it, and it's amazing how many people tell me that get over it. And then the same person will tell me like a story of how their father and grandfather fought against the Germans and those Jerrys in the Second World War. And I'm like, that was 70 years ago, then you get over it, So it's just, that's where I'll stop. Yes.
I apologize. It's a day of talks, and so we had the decolonizing Germany talk earlier, and I spoke to the speaker afterwards. So I think it's a good follow-up. But it's interesting to think in the Rwanda context. I know that there has been work done on how, well, obviously the history, I mean, it's colonial powers and colonization itself that actually exacerbates ethnic tensions, right? And how that history then is often ignored, as you just mentioned. I'm curious how police and military, I mean, you've obviously dealt with a lot of individuals from a lot of different forces. I mean, do they acknowledge it in their work, or I mean, is that kind of awareness at all there or not?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that there is an awareness about it in militaries. I mean, people who have been colonized, so they are more aware of it. So in Rwanda, when you will have a discussion, or in India, or immediately the discussion will become about great power politics and how screwed up that is and how the Security Council is not represented. And then like my job would be, okay, that is something that we cannot solve, so let's bring back the discussion on actually what you can do. But the people who have been colonized will talk about it and the influence it has had, or the kind of, I mean, also they are confronted by it on an everyday basis. I'm confronted by it. So in 2012, for example, Central African Republic. Now, the only way a lot of ambassadors knew about it was when I say Central African Republic. So it's somewhere in Central Africa, nobody really knew where it was. And then, oh, but who colonized them? I mean, literally, ambassadors, French. Talk to the French. Why are you talking to me? And I mean, and also like even within the Security Council, who is the pen holder on a particular, I mean, this is something which is not really written somewhere, but pen holders are some countries which hold the pen on one particular country. Yeah, I mean, guess who holds the pen on Myanmar? The Brits, I mean, or who will hold the pen on CAR? It will be the French. So it's amazing. On Liberia, it will be the US. On Iraq, I mean, it's like it's how you are thinking about, and it's really amazing that those kinds of setups still exist. When you talk to Western militaries, or there is really no acknowledgement. And I mean, even with Western diplomats, and I mean, I still get things like, well, at least, I mean, you speak good English, or the West. I mean, like once we were having this conversation about Ghana, and Ghana is such an interesting case because it's really such a mature democracy, because the election results are always like 0. I mean, the difference is very, very low. Like, I mean, it's 0.01% levels of differences. And it was secured. I mean, so with the group of friends of R2P, all the members of the group of friends of R2P, if they're on the Security Council, we do sort of a Security Council group of friends dinner once, so 3 a year, 3 to 4 a year. And this is sort of an informal, it's a bit of a boys' club, I mean, informal discussion. And I remember my boss saying that, Ghana is a particular case and there's so many good lessons to be learned. And then the British was like, oh, so yeah, I know. I mean, so it was as if like claiming credit, and I'm not going to like rephrase, but it was literally about like, look at Ghana, which is such a great, and then compared it to some country which had been colonized by the French, and oh, it's because of us, and it's very rampant, and people do not talk about it, people do not acknowledge it. So that's where you're at. Yes.
I was wondering, when R2P was passed, where were you, and how did you find your way to this work?
So, I mean, at that time, I was actually thinking about, I mean, I was actually doing a PhD in 2005, and I knew about R2P. I was also very critical of it because, coming from a very post-colonial perspective, I thought it was really problematic. And also because at that time, we had not really had the, I was talking to Max about this, that it was some of the people who have been involved with R2P who have really unpacked this and made it really useful. And one of those people is Professor Edward Luck. He was the first special advisor on the responsibility to protect, and he read the scene very clearly. So R2P was adopted in 2005, and I was sort of watching it from a perspective of a PhD student looking at international relations and sort of very removed from it in a way. And then between 2005 and 2008, I quit my PhD and decided this is not for me. I'm more of a practitioner, so looking for a job. And then I got a job in 2008, and that's when the Global Center was also established. And between the 3 years, between 2005 and 2008, there was buyer's remorse. A lot of countries which were actually very gung-ho about it in 2005 were like, this is not going to go anywhere. It's too sharp. It reeks of military intervention. It's the new wine in an old bottle, or whatever, some of those kind of sayings. And it is in 2005, while I was at the Global Center, and with all due respect to my colleagues then, they were very sort of, for lack of a better word, Hillary liberals, and coming from this place of like, we need to intervene in Darfur. And yeah, in a right kind of situation, in a right kind of way, that would have worked. But that would also have required for you to understand Darfur in itself. I mean, enough project, like towards 2004, like there was all of this noise around 2000, yeah. Whereas most of the atrocities had taken place in 2002. So now there was no point in interfering, or, but what does intervention mean? Boots on the ground, no flag. Like, what does it all actually mean? And there was not really that much clarity around it, but people were very gung-ho on this very sharp end of the, and it was Ed Luck with his first report, and I was around that time. Between June 2008 to December 2008, when he was writing this report, he did many, many consultations with every part of the UN system. So from the Egyptians, and I remember like organizing, I was, a coordinator at the Global Center. And I remember, like, getting tea, coffee, booking rooms, organizing Africa group consultations, Latin America group consultations, and he consulted really, really widely. And one of the things that came out of these consultations was the fact that you need to think about prevention of atrocities, not in terms of here is a fire brigade which is going to put out the fire, but in terms of a more preventive outlook. And R2P through 138, 139 provides you the framework, because the way 138, 139 was written in very legalistic terms, it does tell you about prevention. It starts with state responsibility. And he translated 138, 139 into 3 pillars. He said all these 3 pillars are equal. It's about state responsibility. If you fail, then pillar 3 comes in. But in the middle of it, let's also provide you assistance. Let's unpack what it actually means for the international community to help you. So in that context, it was very, very useful. And I really bought into that idea. But it took me some time, because a lot of my colleagues at that time were very sort of on the sharper end of the thing. And then slowly, I mean, with us, with me, with newer kind of outlook towards the world, we have now come to a place where we actually talk about it in terms of prevention. So, I mean, coming from a place where I talk about colonization, and I always say I'm very post-colonial, and, I understand countries. I mean, a lot of people in the New York bubble will talk about, well, it's the US, UK, and France. I mean, they are supportive of human rights issues, and they're not for sovereignty. It's China and Russia. And I'm like, really, US is not for sovereignty? Can you actually, like, Human Rights Council cannot say anything against the US or UK or France. I mean, it'll be a shitstorm. You know what I mean? So, and sovereignty is not absolute. I mean, with the human rights obligations, different international treaties, sovereignty has been chipped away. The difference between the 3 here, the US, France, and UK, is that they have no problem in infringing upon other sovereignty. Russia and China say no infringing on no sovereignty under no conditions, So, I mean, it's a different worldview. It's how you sit in the international system. And as advocates, I think it's not about demonizing one and thinking about the other as champions. It's about seeing, like, what works, because all of these, I mean, even with Cuba and Venezuela, the countries which are supposed to be sort of very against R2P, and these are the dissenters and we need to bring them to the camp. I mean, for me, even with Cuba, I mean, I respect Cuba. Cuba they have a particular view about foreign policy. It's not only about R2P, it's across the board. They have a particular view about international relations which is informed by their own political traditions. And good or bad or wrong, that's beyond my judgment. But at least they're consistent, And then there are Sudans and, Saudi and Myanmar. I mean, they're the perpetrators. I mean, to me, there's not much discussion there. You're perpetrators. You're killing your own people. Like, I'm not about to convince you to join my club, So that's where I'm at.
So here's just, again, I hope this is less of a rant and more of a question, but I feel right.
Please.
I think that you and I agree on everything, as far as I can tell.
I mean, I rant all the time.
So, okay. So
that's my mode of communication.
So
yes.
I think that the Global Center in general, and you in particular, are really just embody the sort of the transition in the way that we talk about R2P now, of really trying to de-emphasize Pillar 3 and trying to understand that Pillars 1 and 2, in terms of national and multilateral capacity building, was really what the norm does. It's really what the norm, and that sort of that harmonizes with a sort of a general prevention lens approach that says that structural upstream prevention is cheaper and more effective.
Yeah.
And so I agree with all that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here a little bit and just say something like the following. And I think Ed Luck has actually described this a little bit of a dilemma too, about in his version of what's called the prevention paradox, which is to say that if you start focusing so much on structural issues and upstream prevention, then you're talking about, well, there's lots of risk factors that push burden states, failing states, low capacity states in the direction of atrocity and violence. All kinds of things.
Yeah.
So if you can build capacity in states, if you can build efficient governance, if you can build economic reform, institutional reform, political reform, yada yada, then you're going to lower the risk, the longer term and shorter term risk of atrocities. But, and here's the but.
Yeah.
Okay. But insofar as you do go upstream, you're also going to be talking about things that any state should be doing, independent, especially any burden state or developing state should be doing, independently of what their particular atrocity context is. People need access to clean water.
Yeah.
Women and girls need safe places, ways to go to school.
Yeah.
Right. People need access to essential medicines for infectious diseases.
Absolutely.
You need to build some sort of internet infrastructure so that people can actually get and use smartphones. And so as I read Luck lately, I mean, and I don't think he's making actually sort of a hard claim, but he's saying, the further upstream we get, and we start talking about SDGs, we start talking about, we lose the urgency.
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
lose the sense of, like, a whole lot of people are going to get fucking killed unless we get this right.
Yeah.
And I think, it really impresses me that sort of Luck doesn't have the answer. He just says, no. So I would love to hear your thoughts about how you think about that balance between the further upstream you go, the more atrocity prevention sort of melts into
everything. Yeah.
The context of lots of other perfectly also important goals that any country has to face.
So I mean, I'll just correct you slightly. So I'm not de-emphasizing pillar 3. I'm just overemphasizing pillar 1 and pillar 2. Yeah. So I think that the crux of the matter is, and Luck says this all the time, is that there is no conversation if you take out pillar 3. So, when I said we have to compel states to actually uphold their responsibility. But compelling states in upholding their responsibility does not only lead to military intervention, it has many other measures. And it's absolutely, but even the military option should not be off the table. The operational and the political response to atrocities is R2P, and all 3 pillars are as important. If you remove pillar 3, then you're not, then it's not atrocity prevention, it's something else, it's not atrocity prevention. And as you very rightly said, I had this colleague from Brazil, and Nadia was actually at that meeting at Columbia University, and he was like, but why don't you talk about SDGs more? And I'm like, I'm happy to talk about SDGs. SDGs is about all good things. If you do good governance well, your risk of atrocity goes down. But I can't talk about only SDGs when talking about R2P. So, completely agree with you and completely agree with Ed Luck in terms of that you can never de-emphasize, because you have to have coercion and compulsion on behalf of, and that's the reason I believe in the multilateral system. It's not about compelling states to behave because of regime change or because of the fact that, America can talk about Venezuela a particular way. It's about truly believing in the multilateral system and multilateral system as a whole through the UN Security Council with 5 elected members and 5 permanent members and 10 elected members, because they are a very, very important voice. For 10 elected members to come together and decide together whether Venezuela requires a military intervention. And my answer to that would be, actually, there is no consensus, and actually the 10 elected members and the 3 permanent members will tell you, they will laugh you out of the room if you talk about Venezuela in the context of. So I believe in that, and that is how we have to make the decisions. But pillar 3 is absolutely, it's the heart of R2P. You have to compel states because states don't behave well. States and governments are actually, they're the problem.
So to follow up, actually, there must be something we disagree about. The no state, I guess, thinks we'd better get access to essential medicines correct, because if we don't, we're going to have our sovereignty violated.
Yeah.
And so that I think that, and I think that the idea that, going back to your comment, that we would love to eliminate this pesky minority.
Yeah.
But this R2P norm we think is garbage, but we recognize that they're raising the cost on this domestic policy. And so one of the things that fascinates me about the sort of the international relations lens on R2P is norm adoption, sort of the rational choice view versus the constructivist view. Like when states stop, you know, are they adopting the norm?
Yeah.
Or are they strategically responding because they think that other people have adopted the norm and that having done so, they're going to raise the cost on the horrible thing that we want to do, which we think is actually just fine.
Exactly.
So I think that in a sense, one of the things that academics one way that we could pull on the right end of the rope is that, you know, having, you know, been most of the way to a PhD in international relations, you know better than we do that it's very hard to get constructivists and realists to agree on anything.
Yeah.
But one thing that we can do is to say, well, somewhere in there's a pretty good explanation for understanding and potentially predicting state behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
And it may be that norm adoption works really well in working with states in terms of pillars 1 and 2.
Yeah.
It doesn't work so well in terms of pillar 3. But there, at that point, we were talking about raising costs.
Exactly. No, I mean, and that's a great argument. I mean, that's it. I mean, you nailed it in terms of just, I mean, the presence of R2P over the last few years. I mean, even if Myanmar comes and participates in the interactive dialogue and they'll say, you know, they'll never say R2P is invalid. They'll say it doesn't apply to us, you know. And the same thing with South Sudan or Sudan, or they'll say this is a Western conspiracy to say that these crimes are occurring, you know. I mean, they won't deny the validity.
Yesterday, if the next time Vladimir Putin appeals to the R2P, it's like, oh shit, they're about to do something terrible.
Yeah. So, I mean, no, absolutely agree with you. And I mean, I think that also there is this sort of, you know, I mean, with human rights, I mean, when you look at the history of human rights from 1948 to, you know, I mean, over the last century, and again, like now we are seeing you know, an erosion of that consensus on human rights, and nationalism and all of that is back, and, you know, but it's a continuous project. But I mean, you also see a generational shift. So like in 1948, people would laugh you out of the room and say, well, I mean, human rights, those, you know, but by the 1970s, I mean, most countries, or let's say 70s, 80s, or 90s, most countries at least actually pretend to care about human rights. So I mean, a big example of this is that within the Human Rights Council, you have the Universal Periodic Review. In 1948, do you think any country would have said, no, we will actually voluntarily, every member of the international community, all the 193 states, every 4 years will actually present a report to the international community about the state of our human rights. And then in addition to us presenting the report, civil society from our country will also actually present an alternative report. And that was unthinkable. But now we have that. It's absolutely normalized. And, you know, those reports and the recommendations sometimes is not follow-up. But for them to actually even happen, to me, is a miracle. And every country, like from Myanmar, I mean, we are actually going to be providing some recommendations because we have chosen among the 3 different, so there are 2, I mean, this is on North Korea. There are 2 North Korean organizations, and I don't know how they picked us, but we are picked up by the Universal Periodic Review Secretariat, and we are going to actually deliver some recommendations to the government of DPRK on curbing atrocities. So I mean, and that's interesting, but DPRK actually will participate, you know, there will be people from there who will actually participate. And even if they take everything we say and then, you know, throw it in the garbage, they still have to listen to it. So that's normative progress. And it is a mixture of, you know, we have to do it because that's the strategic thing to do, or we have to do it because we actually believe in human rights. So you can.
Anybody else want to get involved? Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.